If you're watching this right now, there's a good chance someone in your life underestimated you. Maybe they ignored your calls. Maybe they dismissed your dreams. Maybe they decided who you were before you ever had the chance to become anything. What I'm about to tell you isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about silence. About what happens when the people who are supposed to love you stop seeing you altogether. And how one Christmas dinner changed everything. For most of my life, my mother barely noticed me. Not in the dramatic, screaming, abusive way people imagine. It was worse than that. She simply didn't care. If you've ever lived inside that kind of quiet rejection, you know exactly what I mean. Growing up, I was the invisible child. My older brother, Daniel, was everything my mother loved. He was loud, confident, athletic. The kind of kid teachers praised and relatives bragged about. And then there was me, quiet, awkward, always in the background. At family gatherings, my mom would light up when Daniel walked into the room. She'd ask about his grades, his friends, his plans. When I walked in, she'd nod. Sometimes she wouldn't even look up. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Kids always think the world revolves around them, right? But as the years passed, it became impossible to ignore. When Daniel needed new soccer cleats, my mom found the money. When I needed books for school, I was told to make do. When Daniel spoke, everyone listened. When I spoke, I was interrupted. And when I stopped speaking altogether, no one noticed. My father tried in his own distant way. He worked long hours and avoided conflict. Whenever I hinted that something felt wrong, he'd say, "That's just how your mother is." As if it explained everything. By the time I was 16, I had learned a simple truth. If I wanted attention, I wouldn't get it by asking. And if I wanted approval, I should stop expecting it. So I turned inward. I spent my time alone, teaching myself things no one else cared about. I learned how businesses worked, how money moved, how systems were built and scaled, not because I had some grand vision, but because learning didn't reject me. When I graduated high school, Daniel had a celebration dinner. Family flew in. Photos were taken. Speeches were made. When I graduated 2 years later, my mom forgot the date. She said she was busy. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. I stopped trying. I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I didn't confront her. I just disappeared. I went to college quietly, picked a degree that made sense, and paid my way through with part-time jobs and loans. My mother never asked what I was studying. She assumed I'd fail. And honestly, for a long time, I almost believed her. After college, I moved to a small apartment and started working a job I didn't care about. I showed up, did my work, and went home. But at night, when the world was quiet, I worked on something else. An idea. A small platform. Nothing flashy. Nothing I told anyone about. I'd learned early that sharing dreams with the wrong people was dangerous. So I kept it to myself. Months passed. Then years. At family gatherings, my mom would still ask Daniel about his promotions, his car, his vacations. When she asked about me, it was always the same question. "So, are you still doing that little job?" I'd nod. That was enough for her. No curiosity. No follow up. Just dismissal. What she didn't know was that my little job paid the bills. And my nights were building something that slowly, quietly began to grow. The first year, I made almost nothing. The second year, enough to cover rent. The third year, more than my day job. I never told my family, not out of spite. Out of habit, I had learned that my success made no difference to them. Until the year everything changed. It started with a phone call from my mother in early December. Her voice was cheerful. Almost fake. "We're doing Christmas at my place this year," she said. "You should come." I hesitated. I hadn't skipped Christmas before, but I'd learned to dread it. Watching Daniel be celebrated while I blended into the furniture was exhausting. Still, something made me say yes. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. A week before Christmas, something unexpected happened. A large company reached out about acquiring my platform. At first, I thought it was spam. Then the calls started. Then the meetings. Numbers were mentioned that made my hand shake. I told no one. Not my father. Not my brother. And definitely not my mother. By Christmas Eve. The deal was finalized. The number was real. Life-changing. I sat alone in my apartment that night, staring at the confirmation email, feeling absolutely nothing. No joy. No pride. Just a strange calm. The next day, I drove to my mother's house, the same house where I'd spent years feeling invisible. When I walked in, nothing had changed. Daniel was already there, laughing loudly, telling stories. My mother hugged him tightly. When she saw me, she smiled politely. "You made it," she said. No hug. We sat down for dinner. The table was full of food, conversation, noise, and as always, no one asked how I was. Halfway through the meal, my mother turned to Daniel. "So," she said, "tell everyone about your promotion." He smiled and launched into a detailed story. I listened quietly. Then my mother looked at me. "And you?" she asked, her tone casual. "Still at that job?" Something inside me shifted. I don't know why I chose that moment. Maybe I was tired of shrinking. Maybe I was tired of being small. I set my fork down. "I sold my company," I said. The table went silent. My mother blinked. "What?" "I sold my company," I repeated calmly. "For about $150 million. Laughter broke out. Daniel laughed first. Then my aunt. Then my mother. "That's funny," she said. "You've always had an imagination." I didn't smile. "I'm serious." The laughter faded. My father stared at me. Daniel frowned. My mother leaned forward. "Don't joke about things like that," she said sharply. "I'm not joking," I said. The deal closed yesterday. The room felt different now. Heavy. Daniel scoffed. "Doing what, exactly?" I took a breath, and for the first time in my life, I told them everything. I took a slow breath, not because I was nervous, but because I'd waited my entire life to speak without being interrupted. I told them about the nights I stayed awake teaching myself skills no one had bothered to ask about the tiny version of the platform I launched from my apartment using a laptop that overheated every hour, about the first user who signed up, then the first 100, then the first 1,000. I told them how I balanced my little job during the day while building something real at night. No one laughed anymore. My mother's face shifted through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to fear. Daniel crossed his arms. "So you just magically became successful?" he said. "No," I replied. "I became invisible enough to work without distractions." That stung him. I could tell. My father finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. Would it have mattered? No one answered. My mother cleared her throat. "Well, if this is true," she said, "why wouldn't you share something so important with your family?" The word family landed. "Wrong." "I did," I said. "I shared it every time I showed up." "You just weren't listening." Her face hardened. "That's not fair." I nodded slowly. "It never is." Dinner ended early after that. The drive back to my apartment was silent, except for my phone buzzing nonstop. Messages, calls, numbers I hadn't heard from in years. Daniel texted first. "So you're actually rich now?" I didn't respond. My mother called 3 times before leaving a voicemail. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I just didn't know," she said. "Call me." For the first time, I didn't feel guilty ignoring her. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Lawyers, accountants, paperwork that turned my quiet life into something public and overwhelming. And suddenly, my family cared. My mother began calling regularly, asking questions, wanting lunch, wanting updates. She told people she was proud of me. It felt strange hearing those words after a lifetime without them. Daniel's attitude changed too. He wanted advice, introductions, opportunities. The same brother who once laughed at me now treated me like a resource. At first, I tried to be gracious. I told myself this was what I always wanted, but something felt off. Their interest didn't feel like love, it felt like proximity to success. One afternoon, my mother invited me over. She'd made my favorite meal from childhood, something she hadn't cooked in decades. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once done homework alone. She smiled at me. "I always knew you were capable," she said. The lie was so smooth. It almost impressed me. I looked at her carefully. "When did you know?" She hesitated. "Well, mothers just sense these things." I nodded. Then I asked the question I carried for years. "Why didn't you like me?" The smile disappeared. "That's not true," she said quickly. "I love you." "That's not what I asked." She looked away. "You were difficult," she said finally, quiet, always in your own world. Daniel needed more attention. The words landed exactly as I'd expected. "So I was easier to ignore," I said. She didn't deny it. Something inside me finally settled. I realized then that her affection wasn't something I had lost. It was something I had never been given. And no amount of money could change that. I stood up. "I didn't come here for approval," I said. "I came here to understand." She reached for my hand. "Don't shut us out now," she said. "We're family." I gently pulled away. "I spent my life on the outside," I said. "This just makes it visible." That was the last real conversation we had. Over time, I created distance, not out of anger, out of clarity. I helped my father quietly when he needed it. I stayed civil with Daniel, but stopped offering favors. And my mother, she struggled. People saw her differently once the truth came out. The proud mother of a successful son narrative didn't quite stick when timelines didn't add up. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't expose her. Silence had always been my language. Years later, I hosted my own Christmas. A small group of people who had actually been there for me. Friends who had seen me before success. As the night wound down, one of them asked if I ever regretted telling my family the truth. I thought about it. "No," I said. "I regret believing I needed it." Because the real victory wasn't the money. It wasn't the shock at the dinner table. It was realizing that being overlooked didn't mean I was insignificant. It meant I was free. And sometimes the people who ignore you are the ones who accidentally give you the space to become everything they never expected. If you've ever felt invisible, remember this. Silence can be a prison, or it can be a workshop. It depends on what you build inside it. And one day, without warning, the world will finally hear what you were doing all along. The story didn't end there. People like to believe that moments like that Christmas dinner are endings. That once the truth comes out, everything settles into place. Real life doesn't work that way. In many ways. That dinner was just the beginning. After I stepped back from my family, something unexpected happened. The noise stopped. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to neglect or approval. I was just living. I moved to a different city. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted a clean slate. No memories tied to sidewalks or grocery stores. No chance of running into someone who still saw me as the quiet kid in the corner. I bought a modest place. Not a mansion. Not a statement. Just space. People assume money changes you overnight. The truth is, it mostly amplifies what's already there. I was still private, still cautious, still uncomfortable being the center of attention, but I was no longer afraid of disappearing. Around that time, Daniel visited me. He hadn't told our mother. He showed up alone, standing awkwardly at my door like a stranger. We sat across from each other in silence for a while. "You really did it," he finally sighed. Not accusing, not joking. Just stating a fact. I nodded. He leaned back. "I don't get it," he said. "You never talked about wanting more." I looked at him carefully. I learned early that talking didn't help. I said. So I worked. Instead, he laughed quietly. Figures. Then his tone changed. I used to think you were weak, he admitted. Mom always said you wouldn't last. That didn't surprise me. What do you think now? I asked. He hesitated. I think you were watching while the rest of us were performing. That was the closest thing to respect I ever heard. From him, we didn't become close after that, but something between us shifted. He stopped competing, stopped asking for favors. For the first time, he treated me like an equal. My mother, on the other hand, spiraled quietly. She called bless. Then not at all. Through relatives, I heard bits and pieces. She struggled with how people perceived her now, with how stories didn't line up the way she wanted. It wasn't that I succeeded. It was that I succeeded without her, and that truth haunted her. One afternoon, nearly 2 years later, my father called. She's sick, he said, not critically, but enough to make the call. I drove back. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Quieter. She was sitting by the window when I walked in. She looked older, not just physically. Something inside her had softened, maybe cracked. She looked at me. For a long time before speaking, I was wrong, she said. No excuses. No justification. Just those 3 words. I sat down. I don't need apologies, I said honestly. I needed awareness a long time ago. She nodded. I didn't understand you, she said. You didn't need me the way Daniel did. And I mistook that for not needing me at all. I let that sink in. I needed you, I said quietly. I just learned to survive without you. She closed her eyes. That conversation didn't heal us, but it closed a chapter. When I left, I didn't feel heavy. I felt complete. Some wounds don't close. They just stop bleeding. Years passed. My life filled with projects, people, and purpose. I invested quietly, mentored anonymously, built things without attaching my name to them. I learned that fulfillment didn't come from being seen. It came from choosing who got access to you. Every Christmas since, I do the same thing. I gather people who showed up when I had nothing to offer. We eat. We laugh. We talk about everything except money. And sometimes, late at night when the room gets quiet, I think about that kid I used to be. The one who sat unnoticed at crowded tables. The one who learned early how to disappear. If I could tell him anything, now it would be this. Being ignored doesn't mean you're unimportant. Sometimes it means you're being trained to rely on yourself, trained to listen instead of perform, trained to build quietly while others chase attention. And one day when no one is watching, you'll look up and realize you were never behind. You were just early. And the silence they left you in, that was the space where everything began. There's something no one tells you about being the overlooked one. When you finally step out of the shadow, the light doesn't feel warm at first. It feels foreign, uncomfortable, almost undeserved. For a long time after everything happened, I struggled with that. People treated me differently now. Strangers listened when I spoke. Doors opened without me knocking. But inside, I was still the same person who learned to sit quietly and expect nothing. That disconnect takes time to heal. I remember one particular moment that made it painfully clear. I was invited to a small private gathering. Nothing flashy. Just a room full of people who were successful in ways I once dreamed about. At one point, the conversation turned to childhood. Someone joked about how their parents pushed them too hard. Another talked about never being allowed to fail. Then someone looked at me. What about you? They asked. Supportive family? I paused. For years, I would have brushed it off with humor, changed the subject, minimized it. This time, I told the truth. I learned independence very early. I said. They nodded politely and moved on, but inside, something shifted. I realized that my story didn't fit neatly into anyone else's narrative, and it didn't need to. That night, I went home and sat alone for a long time. Not lonely, just reflective. I understood then that I had spent most of my life trying to prove something to people who were never watching, and now that I didn't need them anymore. That realization is strangely freeing. I started making decisions based on alignment instead of validation. Projects that felt meaningful instead of impressive. Relationships that felt calm instead of intense. I stopped explaining myself. When people asked what I did, I kept it simple. When they pushed for details, I changed the subject. Not because I was hiding, but because I had nothing to prove. My mother passed away a few years later. Quietly. No dramatic final reconciliation. No movie-style closure. At the funeral, people came up to me and spoke about her pride, about how she talked about her sons. I listened. I nodded. I thanked them. There was no anger. Just acceptance. I realized something important standing there. People do the best they can with the tools they have. Some still fail. That doesn't mean you carry the consequences forever. After the service, Daniel and I stood together for a while. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "She talked about you more." Near the end, I looked at him. "Not the way you think," he added quickly. "She talked about regret. That mattered more than praise ever could." We hugged briefly. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was finished. Life moved forward. I continued. Building, learning, mentoring. Sometimes young people reach out to me now. They recognize parts of themselves in my story. They ask how to stay motivated. When no one believes in them, I always give the same answer. You don't need belief, you need direction. Belief is external. Direction is internal. If you know where you're going, silence becomes fuel. If you don't, even applause won't save you. The world is full of loud people going nowhere and quiet people building everything. I was one of the quiet ones. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you're too. If no one is clapping for you yet. Good. It means you can work without pressure, without noise, without distraction. Use it. Because one day, long after they've stopped paying attention, you'll look around and realize you built an entire life in the space they left empty. And that's not a tragedy. That's an advantage. There's one last part of this story I rarely talk about, not because it's painful, but because it's quiet. After everything settled, after the money, the distance, the understanding, I started noticing something strange. I was no longer driven by the need to prove anyone wrong, and that scared me. For most of my life, neglect had been fuel. Being overlooked gave me something to push against. When that pressure disappeared, I had to learn a new way to exist. I had to answer a question I'd never asked before. Who am I when no one is doubting me? At first, I filled my time with work, more projects, more goals, more motion. But motion without meaning gets exhausting. So I slowed down. I spent time alone, not hiding, just listening. I realized something important during that period. My greatest strength wasn't intelligence or discipline. It was observation. While others were busy being seen, I had been watching. Learning how people behaved when they thought no one noticed. Learning patterns. Learning timing. That's what helped me build everything in silence. And that's what I started teaching others. I began mentoring quietly. No social media posts. No public credit. Just conversations. Young founders. Students. People who felt invisible the way I once did. And I saw the same pattern again and again. The ones who struggled the most weren't the untalented ones. They were the ones desperate to be validated. They rushed. They announced too early. They burned out trying to be seen. The quiet ones, they lasted. One night, after a long conversation with someone just starting out, I walked home and realized something that finally brought the whole story together. My mother didn't break me. She trained me. Not intentionally. Not kindly. But effectively. Her neglect taught me how to self-soothe, how to self-direct, how to build without permission. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it real. In reality is where growth happens. If you're listening to this and you feel unseen, unwanted, overlooked, I want you to understand something. deeply, you are not behind. You are not weak. You are not failing. You are in a phase that most people never survive long enough to benefit from. The phase where no one is watching. Use it. Learn, build, experiment. Fail privately. Because once the attention comes, the freedom goes with it. Attention is expensive. Silence is cheap. In silence, when used correctly, compounds faster than applause ever will. One day, people may look at you and say you came out of nowhere. Let them. You'll know the truth. You didn't come out of nowhere. You came out of years where no one bothered to look, and you turned that emptiness into a foundation. That's the part of the story they'll never see. But it's the part that matters most.